Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Unstoppable podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I'm here today with our guest, David Sun. He's the founder of Proof of Beauty, which is a new community-driven crypto art project, very different from any guest we've had on in the past. And this concept is a little hard to wrap your mind around, so I'm going to bring David on and let him talk about it. He can do a better job than I can. Hey, David, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here and chatting all things crypto, NFTs. Just so many opinions right now, so happy to
Awesome.
hear yours and likewise.
Perfect. So before we dive into the nitty gritty and talk more about Proof of Beauty, I want to hear a little bit more about your background and how you got into crypto. So I'm wondering, Proof of Beauty is a crypto art project. So tell me about your background in art and in technology and sort of, like how those two things intersected for you.
Yeah, yeah. I've been interested in the arts for a while. I would say that was my first, um, I guess, hobby or passion before the computer sciences and crypto. But yeah, from a very young age, I've done traditional arts. There was a point in my life before uh, applying to colleges that I wanted to go to art school and do entertainment art for, draw the Star Wars ships. That, was always been a very diehard passion of mine. Um, but, I kind of bit the computer science bug growing up in Silicon Valley. It's just the influence was there. Everybody was talking about it, so I eventually, took a class, took, another class, went to a few hackathons, and that kept on going until it snowballed into me building side projects. And that's kind of how I manifested my kind of artsy design side, was designing my own side projects, um, and decided to pursue a career in CS, but I always wanted to find a way to, mix the two. And kind of crypto art kind of became a really natural, wow, it's like two of my favorite hobbies or passions put together.
Yeah, what was it like growing up in Silicon Valley? And this was sort of before Silicon Valley was what Silicon Valley is. And I don't know if you were able to sort of see how Silicon Valley went from, a not as well-known place, or maybe only a well-known place amongst developers and sort of a place for the nerds, and now it's like the hotspot to be. What was that like?
Yeah, there's a lot of little anecdotes about that, but I mean, my family, my parents, like they were like the generation that defined Silicon Valley, like gave it its name, right? My dad was an electrical engineer. He was playing with silicon, right? Like if you give me silicon, I don't even, I could tell you it's green, right? That's about it, right? Like it's on the PCB boards, right? But like, um, he was part of that generation, and in many ways, that was the influence of why I'm where I am today. Um, but if there's anything, I've really kind of gone out of grown in this area is it's generational, like generation. I'm trying to figure out the right word here. But time has there has been a lot of time that has defined this space, and all this time wasn't just that space, going up and up and up, right? There has been times where companies have died. There is graveyards there, right? My dad is very representative of an older generation that people kind of forget why it's Silicon Valley, right? There was a time where every startup was silicon derived, and electrical engineering was the hottest job on the block, right? Nobody was pursuing a computer science degree in that formality. Everybody was finding ways to build silicon because that's what's raising money, building businesses, and IPOing. And that, eventually started to cool down, and lesser and lesser people joined the space and whatever. And then there was internet bubble, and it continued again and again. But I grew up in a with a dad that was a few generations older within the innovation cycle. And I think that gave me, probably looking back, one of the more sobering thoughts about the temporal axis of Silicon Valley. That, like, sure, today we're doing, whatever the heck is Silicon Valley doing, it may not be the case soon, right? Or not. And being mindful of how do you play around within the impermanence of a space is very interesting. And I think that's something that a lot of people outside of Silicon Valley don't quite, I think, have an opportunity to observe. Simply out of case of not being in there for so long. But I was born and raised there, so I guess got to see that and hear firsthand what a older generation thought of the newer, technological generations.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear too your opinions and your perspectives as we dive deeper into these topics and how, I do think, I mean, I've spoken to you in the past before, and I do think you have a very pragmatic and a very, like you said, sobering perspective on all of this, like especially with NFTs, and everybody's super hyped about it right now, but you have a very practical perspective on it. So okay, you grew up in Silicon Valley, you were sort of always immersed in the tech scene. When was it that you got exposed to crypto and blockchain? When was it, and then how did you get exposed to it? Was it through Bitcoin, or was it through more of the art side, through NFTs?
Yeah, this was through 2017 bubble during that time where ICOs were going crazy, and at the time I was in college and I was trying to make a quick buck, so I started to contract, find any way to make some money, and at the time I didn't really know much. I bought some random crypto on Coinbase, but I was contracted upon to create well, I guess somebody wanted to build a decentralized exchange, a DEX, at the time, and they gave me Ether Delta, which is one of the OGs DEXs in the space. And he was like, "Hey, can you do this? But Coinbase Pro, can you take these two, combine them together, and create a UX and a product, and write the front end for it?" So I did. And at the time, I started to read the white papers, the Bitcoin white papers, the Ethereum white paper, read into other random cryptos that do not exist anymore. That's also when I read the 0x white paper, which I guess I'll allude to other conversations later. But that's where I really got exposed, was learning that there's this whole financial frontier that blockchain was enabling, and I really bit into that bug. But then there was a few months into that kind of exposure, I started to hear about CryptoKitties, and I think that's what really made me kind of go from this would be cool to work in to like I have to find my career in crypto. Was looking at CryptoKitties and realizing kind of this thing can be fun and can be approachable and can be lighthearted, right? Like I think there's so much gravity to DeFi for a lot of folks and to the ideas of finance that like that was a little bit of a turnoff for me. I wasn't I don't like I still to this day don't enjoy deeply trading, and milking the most amount of money out of what I can do investing, but I do deeply love, the more carefree but slash experimental nature of NFTs. And at the time it was so undefined because we literally just had CryptoPunks and CryptoKitties, and like super rare barely existed. Um, and ENS was one of the more obvious applications that kind of started to come to form then, but it was just very unknown. And so at the time, I actually did create a generative art side project then called We Art. Never took off. And I like to think back, I was a few years early and a few years too impatient about building those, but that indirectly sparked my passion for the generative art space, this idea of using code to produce forms of art. And so that kind of continued as a side hobby, entering my career into crypto.
Yeah, so when you first got exposed to CryptoKitties and that got you excited, did you like understand what that was all about right away? Like breeding kittens online, this makes 100% sense in my head. Or was it something like you're like people actually pay for this stuff, or like where were you there, and then how did you go about learning a little bit more about it, and over time learning more and more, and maybe like if you can call out some of your favorite go-to sources for learning in the space as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it it would be very disingenuous if anybody joins the NFT space above a certain age that doesn't like ask the WTF question about NFTs. And I definitely did. And I think that it's a very healthy part of our capacity as NFT industrialists to continue to have to ask that question: is what in the heck are we creating? I think that question is still incredibly unsolved. And what we have kind of gone to today is a pretty good idea, but not good. I don't think good enough, or there's more to define and more to kind of explore. But I'll table that for now. Um, but yeah, like I personally, I loved the kind of approach of grokking what the blockchain is used for. I think, I was part of the blockchain club at the time, and how people were able to wrap their head around CryptoKitties. This idea that it's a tradable asset. People were talking about it with like a breath of like, how the hell does this happen? But I I keep on coming back to this idea. It's like, don't discount these dumb things because you're spending brain power on them, usually more than you do spend on the things that are too smart and too, not too smart, but too brilliant that you can't just, briefly think about it on a walk. It's more like maybe a sit down kind of a deal. NFTs has this playful, almost comical nature to it that makes people just think about it, question it, get angry about it, and that's what we did. And I did that. And I came to a point where it was just like, whoa, um, there's a lot of more you can explore beyond this, right? And it's not financial in nature, meaning that I have, I could do whatever the heck, and there's no precedent that I had to, uh, grade myself on. It was just like I just wanted to create cool shit, and this was a very playful medium. And I didn't really think much harder beyond like its, implications on on culture or on digital media. I just was, this is cool, and seeing it do cool things with CryptoKitties, I thought, it would be fun if I tried.
Yeah, for sure. So now that, you're a few years down the line and you've learned a lot more about it and what the implications of NFTs are, how would you explain NFTs to somebody like your parents or your grandma or something in a way that gets them excited about it?
Uh, Excited. That I've continued to have a interesting thought on just in the general blockchain context. Um, but I think that especially with today's world, with what NFTs are and its prior metaphors that are very similar. What do we call it? Like trading cards, like Yu-Gi-Oh, baseball cards, game assets, within those. It's I like if I were to explain it, which I'm not gonna give a explanation at the capacity that I don't have a good one anymore. But like non-fungible tokens don't imply it's on the blockchain. Just saying NFT, I don't think strongly implies it. It's just a representation of something on a ledger that is unique among each representation of it. Um, and so to spark the excitement, I don't think the blockchain part does. Like, it's more of the matter that there's this vibrant ecosystem, there's a community um, of people who are absorbed by these things, right? Like, I think like this has been something like a point of like friction with my dad when I was growing up was I played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh when I was younger. He couldn't fathom, why these pieces of cardboard had value, and some of them would have hundreds of dollars of value, right? And some don't, right? But then if you were entrenched within its circle, its community, understood its rules, its norms, um, that part of what do you call it, the NFT crusade of convincing people it's worthwhile to invest in, it doesn't really come in a form of explanation. It almost comes in a form of experiencing it, of experiences. And I've been personally very um, what's the right word? Like very I guess not. I guess I've been not very bullish on the capacity to explain NFTs, but more or less, I'm very, very bullish on people being able to experience it and fuel the energy of, seeing it in the metaverse, or selling it for a profit. And then you start less and less asking why, what is an NFT? More so you just like know what it is, and it becomes more indescribable, right? Like I think it's very hard for people to explain why does a Yu-Gi-Oh card, a baseball card have value, right? But it somehow does, right? And it's almost the experience of it that created this weird nebulous story in your brain and everybody else's brain that enjoys a thing. Um, and I think, yeah, that's where I'm at a point. My headspace is like, I've kind of think it's not wasteful, but um, not the highest ROI to go out and try to explain this technology to everybody. It's more or less like, I think it's show more is more useful here, and I think, heads down, build ways to show it. Um,
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, and I agree 100%. I think when I first heard about NFTs, I definitely did not understand what was going on. And as I started to learn more about it, research more about it, it was like one day it just clicked for me. And then all of a sudden, I was like done comparing NFT art to traditional art, which is like sort of where I had started mentally, and realized that it's so much more than that. And I think like what you kept harping on, the experience in the community, like the community part of it is a really big draw for me. And what makes me so bullish on NFTs is the long-term capacity for community, like not just within creators of NFTs, but also within consumers of NFTs, and as and curators too. And I think this creates a very vibrant ecosystem where everybody can get involved. It's not just professional curators, museums, really rich people who can afford expensive art. It really opens it up to anyone and everyone to get involved. And I think that's something that really excites me. So I 100% agree with you. And like you said, the best way to learn about NFTs is to go out there and experience it. So if you haven't played around with it yet, go out and buy some art, or if you're an artist, go out and mint some art as an NFT, or go play around with CryptoKitties or anything like that. Experience the ecosystem, get on crypto Twitter, and I think you'll start to understand the value of NFTs. So, all right, let's move on and talk a little bit more about Proof of Beauty. So you recently left your job. I want to say it was back in March of this year. You were working at 0x Labs as a front-end engineer, and you just left there to work on Proof of Beauty full time. So starting with that, how hard or easy was that decision?
it was easy and hard. um, Creating this proof of beauty as a, it has been an idea that's been itching on my head for years. So, um, I was at a place mentally where I didn't quite know what exactly, what career progression meant. And more or less, I knew more clearly was what I wanted to do. Like, I know what I wanted to spend my time on, but I didn't know what that would mean. If that meant, am I a senior front end engineer? If I'm that or this at whatever institution. So when Proof of Beauty started to grow, I was pretty much mentally ready, right, to want to pursue this full time. I think I would definitely have regretted it if I didn't try to, take all these wacky ideas I had in my head for years and find a way to do it for a living. But beyond that, just like Zero X is still my first home in crypto, and ever fortunate to have been there. Um, and I was on a very good team, and we were doing some really good stuff. I thought really, really groundbreaking stuff that, I got into crypto because I first bought into the open finance DeFi narrative before the NFT narrative, right? And Zero X is very much so about the open finance, this tokenized world, value flowing freely world. And I really still strongly believe about that. Um, but I think like what you want to do sometimes it supersedes your ideals, and I think that superseded in my head. Was like I wanted to explore what NFTs can do, and and I don't know, I had to say a few goodbyes and leave a space that leave a organization I did that I'm very very happy to be part of, to have been part of, I guess, past tense now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that sentiment. It's sort of bittersweet. So you said that you've been working on the idea of proof of beauty for a few years now. So how did you originally get that idea? Take us back to when the idea first spawned. Was it the same idea that it is today, or how did it develop over time? And then talk a little bit more about, what is proof of beauty?
Yeah, Proof of Beauty, I mean, or Proof of Beauty Studios, that had so many names before it, and it was just this fundamental idea that, with NFTs, we got to experiment with the very medium that is capturing this art and using that as part of its art process. And what I really kind of want to mean by that is, if Banksy can place a graffiti, or a piece of work on a public wall, right? In many ways, his art is propelled by the very medium it's placed on, right? And he really is one of the few artists that I think genuinely uses the medium as part of its artwork, right? I think a Banksy piece, if it was not on the Israeli border wall and it was on something else, this value wouldn't, well, what it's trying to symbolize isn't as complete, right? It's the actual final act of where you placed his art, where Banksy puts his graffiti pieces, or just graffiti made for some art collectors maybe derogatory, just art, I guess, art. Wherever he puts it on a public wall, that's part of the statement, right? And I found that to be absolutely interesting, right? And I think that blockchain and NFTs was this very, very um, expressible, metaphorical public wall, right? And how you put it on the blockchain was very um, expressible and also part of the art. And so at the time, this came in the form of so many different ideas. I had something called the fine wine concept, which was you had this NFT that changed, that grew in value every time it was transferred. So it starts very underdeveloped, and then it had to be used. It has to be given to so many different owners before it finally grows like it gets a patina, right? I had some other ideas. One was called the Olympic torch, was just like this idea that you know this token has no value, and but it had to be transferred like an Olympic torch to different people, and the very people that held it gives it value, right? Or held it, right? And so I had all these kind of ideas, and I was kind of cherry picking among them. Which one did I think could be done? And that was at the time in the form of, how do we capture Ethereum history meaningfully, right? And I think that's, I think Ethereum has a really, really rich history, right? From the DAO hack, from all these forks, from DeFi, the emergence of, NFTs. And I wanted to find a way to express that beyond just going on Etherscan and seeing the gas where it was sent to and from. I thought there was more we can do. And I drew a lot of parallels to, what Banksy was doing, what a lot of artists do, which is critiquing events, right? We create works upon the very thing that has happened, right? I think some of the most famous paintings are like the Constitution being signed, the French Revolution, right? World War II photography, the Vietnam War, and how pivotal photojournalism was to that conflict, right? We art in many ways is so strongly tied to history, and I thought that this should be the natural first thing to do for Proof of Beauty as a studio that was interested in creating, blockchain art or crypto art, whatever you want to call it. So in between it came into form like what if we did a coffee book, and then that became what if we just did NFTs, and then blah 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 blah, and then eventually half a year ago it was like I can muse about this forever, but I gotta ship a form of this idea, and I took the simplest form of it was just let's create NFTs deriving um, its visual look from transaction data. So, you feed it a transaction hash, and then we go on the blockchain and take the gas price, the data, who it was sent from and to, and then we take all of this and that controls color, controls composition, controls complexity and whatever, right? And so I wanted to create a way to visualize Ethereum history in a artistic way, not a visualization way, not like through graphs. I want to do it artistically. So um, yeah, and that became the first thing that was shipped, and somehow that grew to a point where it's like, okay, this project has legs, and not just legs, but I think Proof of Beauty as a creative exploration, this idea of exploring what NFTs are, um, can actually become my full-time job, and so I I pulled the trigger, and so yeah, hash is what I just described, this history thing is called hash, and that's our first project. Uh, so yeah, hopefully that explained it.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's super cool. And I'm sure people are wondering, so how does it work? Like, how are you able to take a bunch of boring transaction data and turn it into visually appealing art? How does that work?
Yeah, the first few steps I think is rather understandable, right? It's obviously we take a hash, which is a identifier of a transaction, and then we go and we make a transaction data call and get all that information from the public blockchain through our RPC nodes or whatever. That we're just automating what we do on Etherscan, right? We take all that data, right? Um, and then this is something that I guess I took out of the books of CryptoKitties, was we convert that to what we call a gene. Um, and a gene really is just visual, like they're just like little knobs that you could turn and twist to get you different visual output, right? So um, the gas price will control the texture that you would see on the artwork. So if you have a higher gas price, it would turn the knob more metaphorically to the right, and if less, then more to the left, blah, blah, blah. And then the addresses control the colors. So if you fed this address, it would always give you this color palette, and then this address will give you that color palette, right? So there's a point where like, if you gave me a transaction, like a artwork, I can, if it's like a famous, contract, I can usually guess which contract, was involved with this transaction because the artwork has that color. And I know because I've looked at so many artworks and I was like, oh, this color, that's Uniswap, or this color, that's Compound. Um, but yeah, so we have this gene, and this gene is then read by a algorithm that produces via shaders and WebGL stuff a piece of art. But there's like this, it's pretty much like a huge pipeline of transforming data back and forth until it's something that is visually appealing. Um, and there's obviously a lot of complexities with this, but
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just wondering, do you ever get a transaction based on all the data involved that turns out to be visually not appealing? Like you get colors that clash, you get designs that clash. Does that happen?
not it doesn't just happen. It's something we design. I have to design around. Um, and this is something that this is purely within the capacity as a generative artist. Is usually what happens when you're a generative artist is you produce like 1,000 iterations, right? So you have 1,000 images, and then from 1,000 you choose like 10, and then you put those 10 on Instagram because those are the best 10. Um, but in our problem, we effectively outsourced the curation part, right? I gave you guys the algorithm, and everybody's just hitting it, hitting it, hitting it, and then among this, people will choose which ones are worth either visually or historically appealing enough to mint, right? And that's why we call it proof of beauty as a studio. Is the proof, there's like almost like an odd consensus system where people are curating and I provide the thing to curate. Um, so with that, as a generative artist, the problem doesn't become of how do I choose, but more so is how do I create an algorithm that creates enough good output, right? So um, I had like this very loose metric in my head is if this algorithm can, or this generative art can create 1,000 outputs, and if I could deem 20 to 30% of them to be good, then I think this algorithm is good enough, right? And I would try to push that what is good enough as high as I can, right? But then some of these algorithms is like you just simply it's hard to push that barrier without making it look contrived or whatever. And this is purely artistic, but yeah, there's like this little threshold that I grade my work off of. So like, um, before I release the next season and even the season before it, I looked at like tens of thousands of these outputs, and I thought, okay, I guess out of all of them, X% was good enough to look visually good enough to be minted. And I was like, okay, hit the bar. I think it's ready to go. So there is, yes, some that I still think are absolutely horrendous. But you can't design for all cases because it's visual, right? It's not graded upon a definitive output, right? It's all a matter of opinion. So
Yeah, 100%. So you alluded to some things. People actually get to vote on which designs they like best. So take me back to your Genesis project, Hash. Like, take me back to the very beginning. How does the process work for new projects? Like, so you create these algorithms, or I guess the first step would be you choose a category. So in the case of Hash, it's sort of like historical transactions on Ethereum. And then you create these algorithms and then you generate all of these pieces. And then what happens next? It gets pushed out to the people and the people vote on it. And then how many pieces come out of that for Hash? Walk me through that whole process if you can.
in many ways, it's the algorithm is just kind of placed out there publicly. POB or hash.pob.studio. Go under, it's in the source code. And what happens really is uh, people look for hashes, transaction hashes. People go on Etherscan and they find, Uniswap's first transaction and whatever. And then they would try to copy and paste it in. And then on the fly, because the algorithm is sitting on your computer, um, it generates it there, right? So theoretically, since the algorithm is there, all one, is it billion or trillion? I keep on forgetting. Every single transaction on Ethereum blockchain can has a visual version of it that exists. Um, it's just a matter of has it been seen before. Um, and so once somebody sees it, like, okay, this one looks visually appealing or not, uh, they vote in quotes by minting it, right? So so once they see the output, they're like, okay, and it doesn't exist as a token yet. So then they hit the mint button and they pay some amount of ETH, and then we then create that token. So in many ways, um, there's no voting system. More or less, the voting is done through minting, right? You're pretty much proving that this is not just that this is worth tokenizing because you paid, me some amount of ETH and then you hit the mint button, you paid gas fee, right? So in many ways, that's where you're affirming its quality, right? You're giving it more life, right? Beyond just an output of an algorithm. Um, and that's that. And why it's designed like this was, you know, history is so, I guess, loosely defined for so many people, right? Uh, who's to say what part of your personal history is worth tokenizing or worth capturing in art? Uh, Maybe for larger projects like Uniswap, there's maybe more of a governance that would be involved, but I didn't want to make any of those calls, right? I wanted an open blank slate, and people, if they thought it was worth it, then they should just mint it, right? Because history could be so personal to so many people, and in retrospect, some of the most successful, you know, uh, um, tweets, people enjoying the artworks are about personal history above anything else. Other artists minting their very first transaction on the blockchain, other communities or even other people say, hey, this is my first transaction buying an NFT, right? Like it's as simple as it gets, right? And if there was some kind of thing that they had to ask me for permission or community for permission, I think it would kind of dilute um, the experience that Hash can provide. So I pretty much had a very open for all and let people decide, blank slate kind of a mentality, was let them control the mint button, um, more than anything else.
Very cool. Very cool. So how many NFTs total were created from the Hash project?
Yeah, so we're currently season zero. Season zero is we just kind of define blocks of supply. So the first season was about 2,555, and they have all been minted about a month ago at this point. So if you go in OpenSea, there's 2,555 of them, and that's season zero. But we took a approach kind of like I guess fashion seasons. You know how spring season, spring collection, winter has their own collection. We kind of did that, but for Hash. So we have a season one planned for, I guess, as of recording in a week, but hopefully at the time of hearing it's already launched. But season one, we're gonna open the doors again and say, hey, we are gonna allow another X amount of mints. So go and do what you did with season zero. It's a new visual art style. We rebuilt a lot of the product around it, the website, to be thematically about, you know, personal history, but celebrating your history on the blockchain. And we built a pricing model that is very accommodating to people to mint their own history. Um, so, every kind of like, instead of like, spring collection, we did personal history collection, right? So every season has their own theme. And every season will increase the supply of artworks that have been minted. And also, hopefully, we're hoping to create is for early supporters is kind of like, if you own an OG pair of Jordans, it has more value because it's old and it's one of the original collections. We hope that this seasonal model will kind of create tiers of artistic value, where season zero will be valued higher because it was the original season, and subsequently they will lose or not lose, but have lower value because they're later seasons. Um, but yeah, so that's how supply is defined with Hash.
Got it. Got it. And so, how long did it take for those 2,555 NFTs to be minted in your season zero? And then, how fast do you expect it to go in season one? Just so people know, like, if they're listening and you've yet to launch, like, how much time do they have to go and get this done?
Yeah, season zero, I launched it at late January, and I think early March is when we sold it all out. February was mostly slow. I think it's late February where, communities started to form. That's where really we kind of hit a growth spurt. There was kind of like crypto influencers talking about proof of beauty. The key thing is the proof of beauty season zero had a pricing model that was interesting, I guess, to say the least, is at some point the price was growing for every subsequent mint, right? So if you minted the 1,000th piece, it would have been priced at, let's just say, zero point 0.5, right? And then the 1,010th piece would have been priced at 0.55, right? So it was growing in price. And there was the main reason why we designed it like that was we wanted it as the project grew, we wanted people to put more gravity to what they were minting. We didn't want people just to mint random history. We wanted people to mint the right history, and the pricing was designed to give it more weight. And obviously that works for like capturing Ethereum history at large, right? Just the biggest moments of Ethereum history. How do we tokenize that? This was the best pricing model, I thought, to do that. But indirectly, obviously, as a price increases, lesser and lesser people can buy it, right? Um, so fortunately, it sold out extremely fast in the first 2 weeks of March. Um, it kind of just hit a spurt. Everybody kind of like enjoyed the project, loved the project, and kind of aped in. So we sold out way faster than I thought. I was targeting mid-April when we sell out, but came about a month and a half earlier. Um, so that definitely kind of like caught a windfall. Season one, we have made a lot of decisions around it such that it will last a lot longer than a month before it sells out, mainly to give myself some sanity. Uh, when season zero sold out, everybody's like, "When's season one? When's season one?" I'm like, "Well, I don't. I have 24 hours a day. I have a life to live, and I couldn't, build it fast enough because I was targeting mid-April was when season zero was sell out, and season one is supposed to come out in late April, right? Like that was initial planning, and so when it sold out a month early, that definitely threw me by surprise. But season one is designed to last a lot longer. Mainly out of we have enlarged supply from 2,555 to a higher number by a bit to hopefully get more people into the community and also give it more time to let people to join. So hopefully it'll last longer than a month. Hopefully a little longer. For two, three. I'm saying this is a very good problem to have, but uh, um, yeah, I hope it lasts longer. It gives me time to breathe. There's a lot of other things that I got to work on internally to create a operational studio. And two, is there some other ideas that we want to work on that are very interesting, and they would take lot more time than just releasing a new season. Um, and so we want to work on those ideas, and we don't want to leave our community with nothing for like 4 months, and then be like, hey, we're back. We want to give them we want to give them something to play around. So hopefully it's longer.
For sure. I hope so too. Yeah. And then do you know much about like who are the people that minted those first 2,555 from your season zero? Are they mostly, I assume they're probably more so crypto natives than the people that just jumped on that NFT bandwagon in the last couple of months because they, had to have some sort of transaction history or at least be able to have a basic understanding of how this project works. But moving forward, I guess, like, what's your goal or vision in terms of building the community around Proof of Beauty? Is it that you want to reach the mainstream and the masses with Proof of Beauty and, sort of make NFT and blockchain and crypto more accessible to the quote unquote normies? Or is that not really part of the vision and you're happy to, sort of keep it within the crypto community?
I think Proof of Beauty Studios will grow with the community. I'm very bullish that NFT as a space will grow, exponentially, and more people will be within this space. And I think there's a lot of moving parts before that actually happens. Um, but yeah, Proof of Beauty metaphorically I've always looked at it as like a mirror of the very medium it's creating on, and that medium is blockchain. And we live in a world where currently most of blockchain culture is very housed within crypto culture. And so a lot of the projects we have planned is very much so about commentary about these um, about our culture, right? But I kind of want to bring it back to the Banksy metaphor. Is I think some Banksy pieces are contextually more narrow than most people would realize. Like some of these are commentary on political culture, political climates, right? And I don't frankly have a deep understanding of the geopolitical environment, but I think fundamentally what Banksy did well was he created good art, right? Like something that visually could still stand on its own, that uh, was powerful enough to house commentary, even for somebody that doesn't fully grok the thing. And that's kind of within the interest of Proof of Beauty, is that um, we want to create, first of all, is just visually or sensorily appealing works. Um, And we believe that using the blockchain and tokenizing will elevate the experience, will enable the community, the crypto community, to see the blockchain in a new way. And if that means more and more people join it, then we will create projects that reflect the current community and its headspace. And maybe in a few years, that just means creating things that seems mainstream. Um, and I guess today is maybe not the case, but I guess there is a little bit more of a reactionary element to it. But I also do see this as an opportunity for Proof of Beauty to kind of push the narrative of what NFTs are, and I think that will also help NFTs join the mainstream. And I think you're right. Like I think, and again, like what Banksy has done with public arts, um, and putting these as public pieces, not as canvases hanging on somebody's wall. I think he has elevated that as a medium, right? And there's some amount of sophistication to fully, I think, grok his works. Um, and I think the same, at least I hope, and that's what I aspire for Proof of Beauty Studios, is to create work that is uh, um, complex enough for folks to understand, but also powerful enough for people to kind of feel why it exists. Uh, um, and I think that's the strategy when it comes to doing things that could qualify as popular or as mainstream. Um, is still just creating good art, and I think good art reaches people.
Yeah, I think like as blockchain grows into the future as well, and more transactions take place on the blockchain, then you just have more and more options for different themes and different projects that you can create on Proof of Beauty. So definitely the options are endless, I think, out there. And speaking of the future, where do you envision NFTs being in, say, 10 years?
Well, I I think I mean the big problem with today is people too closely affiliate file extensions to NFTs. Like people say, oh, it's just a PNG file, it's a JPEG file. And I think that in 10 years from now, that will not be the case. Um, what an NFT is and the verbs associated with an NFT are going to be so much more diverse than what we have today. Right now, it's mostly mint, buy, and sell. Um, we're already seeing the beginnings of I'm liking this. I think obviously invest is one of the verbs, but that is kind of undermined by the idea of just buying and selling right now. But I like this idea of you know NFTs starting to be an investment vehicle for people in culture. I like this idea that people, this is me coming from a very DeFi mindset, is I love those projects that allows you to take loans out with NFTs, right? I love the projects that provide that creates index funds for NFTs. We're really working on how do we expand the verbs that are associated with this token, and I think that in 10 years, buying and selling will still be very important. But I wouldn't be surprised if most people will be interacting with NFTs, not through those two verbs, if not actually everybody. And maybe most people will be interacting with NFTs in a way that they don't even know there's like a token representation behind the scenes. And I don't frankly have a full idea what those new verbs will be as the metaverse grows, as crypto voxels Decentraland grows. I think they are part of it. And I like to think Proof of Beauty is part of that direction. Um, but I think that eventually we're going to get to a point where the word is a lot more synonymous with just, with capturing culture, right, than capturing a file extension. Um, and we're not at there yet. And I think in 10 years, we're going to start to see so much more exploration, because right now we're at a place where I think we're still working on building rails, like OpenSea and all these exchange protocols. We're finding ways just to tokenize, right? We haven't really had the time or the opportunity to really go further, and that's where I'm personally very interested and bullish that uh, we're really going to start seeing a Cambrian explosion of that um, in a few years. And that will lead to some really insane stuff that hopefully will be cool.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. It's sort of like in the early days of the internet or when the internet just came to be, nobody could imagine, say, social media. Like the whole concept of social media was beyond what anybody could comprehend. So I think we're at a stage where we can't even comprehend all the things that can come out of NFTs and blockchain. And so I'm very excited to see the different projects that push the boundaries. And I think that's exactly what Proof of Beauty is doing. Really excited about that. So last thing, I know you had mentioned earlier that your initial foray into the crypto space, like being serious about it and working full time in it, was through 0x Labs. So very quickly, I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about what 0x Labs is and share maybe some highlights from your experience there?
I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what 0x Labs and 0x at large is. And that's, I don't think to the fault of really anybody beyond just the sheer velocity of ideas in the crypto Twitter space and things getting diluted to the point of confusion. Um, but yeah, like 0x, Labs is, where we have a 0x protocol, and 0x Labs is the main caretaker of the 0x protocol, and the 0x protocol, in many ways, I guess, with the current version of it and its current iteration, is very comparable to, I guess, Uniswap slash 1inch. We create a protocol system that allows you to buy and sell things decentralized, right? It's a DEX. That's as far as people need to know about it, right? There's a technological, ecosystem that is making your DEX experience hopefully the best with the 0x protocol. But I think for most people, you just need to know that it's just like Uniswap. It's just like 1inch. And you can use 0x through matcha.xyz, which is something that I've been working on or worked on for about half a year. But it's the Robin Hood of DEXs. At least that's what we hope to build. We're hoped. Uh, and yeah, so that's what 0x Labs is. If you dig a little bit into the blogs and everything, you'll realize that 0x has a deeply ingrained uh, vision and culture about things getting tokenized, everything getting tokenized. And so from the beginning, there's always been a fairly strong NFT presence internally. I think Will Warren loves NFTs, the CEO of 0x Labs. And there was a ton of people internally that loved 0x, that loved NFTs, and 0x Protocol was one of the first protocols that supported non-fungible tokens. Way back when the ERC 721 spec came out, and the Wyvern protocol, which powers OpenSea. So many other protocols has been inspired from the 0x design. So yeah, so 0x has definitely had a very big presence in the space. My personal experience is joining 0x was, during 2017, we were at a blockchain industry that hasn't quite found, I guess, product market fit, right? Like it was kind of still figuring itself out. And so it made sense to me to join a organization that had a very strong opportunity to understand how the space is moving, right? It had a great vantage point to see how blockchain and crypto was moving around and growing and developing. So that was one of my big things why I joined 0x Labs, and I'm thankful to say that it gave me that experience. I was able to see Uniswap go from an idea to V1, and all of that, and I saw the NFT boom, and the projects between those booms, like Gods on the Chain and whatever. And yeah, so I'm ever thankful of that experience, right? And also working for a company that's not venture capital backed, or used to not be the case. Um, that was a very novel experience, just understanding, as a company, what was our incentives, what was keeping us motivated, which was very different than a VC backed company, I think. Um, and that was a very, very fresh experience and something that I really wanted. uh, when I, decided to start a career in crypto.
Yeah, and I'm sure that probably taught you a lot about how you're running Proof of Beauty now as well, too, because you guys aren't venture backed, and I don't know if that's it. From our past conversations, it doesn't sound like that's something that you're seeking, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, as of now, I've chatted with a few folks, and I think we've all kind of come down to consensus is that as a studio format, there's not a lot about this that is venture backable, or at least aligning with venture capital returns that they would want, and that's been something that I've been personally very interested in from the beginning. Was I don't think I would like to run a venture-backed organization. That's just not my cup of tea, and I wanted something a little bit more freeform, exploratory, a lot more creative control within the capacity of what I wanted to do. And Private Beauty Studios, because we directly sell our project, our product in quotes to our community members, and they help to capitalize, our capacity to continue to create. Um, we're in a space where it just doesn't make sense. Slash, it doesn't need to. We don't need venture capital. There, yeah. So I think I think in many ways is, you know, on the same formula of why I joined ZeroX. I'm very happy to work in a way that is kind of also undefined what it means to have, well, what incentives are um, to work, and that's been a personal interest to discover and hopefully push forward. So yeah, like I guess I report to myself and only myself, and if I don't like it, it's all up to me to figure that out and obviously react to the community. But the relationship is so much more like an artist to the people that appreciate art than that of a product team creating a product for a base of consumers. So
Yeah, for sure. And it almost feels like to me that without the venture backed, your incentives are almost more pure and almost more simple, right? Because
yeah,
your incentive is just that this is what you're passionate about and you really want to make this work. And that's basically it.
yeah, that was one of the things for me was just yeah, like um, I've been very adamant to be very transparent to the Proof of Beauty community, um, and one of the big things to me was like um, this is a creative vessel, and I wanted to keep the incentives were very simple, right? I'm not in a place where I want to grow this to a point where it's super massive. I don't have a reason. I don't care to go to TechCrunch, Disrupt. I don't care to be on TechCrunch or Product Hunt. I just care about building something that you guys would appreciate, and I think people understanding that stuff, that's as pure as it gets. I think in a space where there's so many new projects coming out, I think I at least I hope that people see this as a measure of um, longevity of a project. As like, okay, these guys like they're not just here to make a quick buck. Like this, there's a deep passion to this. He's here because he loves creating these things, and his fundraising is strongly tied to his capacity to create things that you guys will enjoy. And there's no nebulous behind the scenes, fundraising system that he has to align himself to, which is not a problem for most ideas, right? But I think for what Proof of Beauty is, I don't think that's the best thing.
Yeah, 100%. I was also going to say it also feels like a breath of fresh air, in an environment that, can be very competitive. Like you guys are just here to create and that's so pure and fresh in so many ways. All
Yeah,
right. So, this last segment that we have, David, is what I call explain your tweet. This is where I go through your Twitter and I pull
hmm,
out some interesting or cryptic or funny tweets. You
yeah,
don't tweet that much, which almost
uh-huh.
makes your tweets more valuable because they're so few and far between.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna pull out a few. The most
sure.
recent one I've got for you is, and this might actually still be your most recent tweet,
Yeah,
was from April 4th. It was actually a retweet of crypto corgis. So
yeah.
I was just wondering, are you a big fan of crypto corgis? Are you a user, and are you more of a crypto corgis fan now than a crypto kitties fan? Your OG loyalty. Where do you stand with that?
Yeah, to provide color, one of my ex-coworkers, I guess one of my, I guess informally one of my mentors when I was at Xerox, he started Crypto Corgis, and we both were personally we both were NFT kind of people, when we were still at Xerox. But he kind of started Crypto Corgis, and I wanted to support it, so that's why I mainly retweeted it. But I personally really like a lot of parts of Crypto Corgis. We chatted a ton about the design of that project. And there's a lot of, I think, interesting things that has happened. He has this idea of like, uh, I guess, what do you want to call it? Like a rolling window, where a corgi is what do you call it? Mintable, and then within 256 blocks, if it's not minted, it quote unquote dies. Um, and so people are like, save it from death by minting it. So I think it drove a lot of FOMO. The community was pretty cool to see. So yeah, like it was mostly, I think, I liked the thinking. I kind of helped out a little bit, and somebody I deeply, respected created it. And I personally quite like the corgis. Uh, I personally haven't followed kitties recently enough to know all of the complex traits involved, but corgis is a lot simpler, so I approached that. And also, he created a corgi specifically for Proof of Beauty, so that kind of also won me over. So, um,
Very cool. I'm more of a dog person too myself. And I think that's a really cool concept that it's almost like, like you've got these corgis at the shelter and you have to adopt them or else they get sent to the no-kill shelter and that's it for them. So go
yeah,
save a corgi.
yeah.
All right. And then the next tweet I have, this is all the way back from October 9th, 2020. You tweeted, with the lower gas fees today and not wanting to be my own artwork whale, artwork NFT giveaway. Whatever you want, one per person, just retweet with the one you want and an address and I'll send it your way on through the weekend. I was just wondering, are you still making your own art, like non-proof of beauty art? And are you still like selling your own art on, I think this was on Rarible. Yeah.
Definitely not the case now. Um, yeah, like this was, before like Proof of Beauty was still like 5% done at that time. But I was creating generative art, and I wasn't certain at the time of like um, how I wanted to create crypto art, and so I was just like, let me just do the simplest thing, which is put it on Rarible. But soon to realize that unless you have a lot of followers and know the right people, you really can't sell your own artworks on Rarible unless they are of a very specific style, right? Which is right now a derivation of Beeple or a derivation of Peck, right? It's pretty much like within those realms, but like just yeah, like I think through that experience of selling my own things, I realized that like if you were to do generative art or do your own thing, you gotta really give it something special. Um, and I was kind of just giving them away because it was just like, well, there's no point of me holding them. But the deeper lesson was, um, if I were to do what I wanted to do, which is create generative art, I gotta house it in a very special way, and that's was the impulse to get Proof of Beauty going. So yeah, that was in many ways like a big seminal realization on my part. How do you survive within the crypto art ecosystem?
Got it. Got it. Wow. I didn't even realize there was that much meaning behind it, but I'm glad I called it out. All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for coming on the podcast. And I apologize for keeping you past time. Hopefully, you don't have another meeting right after this. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. Before you go, last thing, just tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, and then where they can go to learn more about Proof of Beauty and also to make sure that they don't miss the season 1 launch.
Yeah, my personal Twitter is just Dave4506. You can find me there, and my DMs are open. Ping me there, or even the Proof of Beauty Twitter. But if you want to find all the Proof of Beauty links, just go to pob.studio. That's our website. Go on there, and it'll pretty much outbound you to everything that is of related to Proof of Beauty. And I'm a lot more active with Proof of Beauty than on my personal social life, social digital worlds. So always open to DMs and hearing other people's thoughts and ideas within crypto at large. So yeah, find me there.
Awesome. Thanks again so much, David. I can't wait to see where Proof of Beauty goes and for the season 1 launch to come out, and so I can mint my own NFT as well in season 1. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of the Unstoppable podcast.